Are you okay? Good evening. I'd like to welcome members to this evening's meeting of the Strategic Overview and Scrutiny Committee and to the members of the public who are listening in via the Zoom webcast. We have a busy agenda for this evening's meeting. So firstly, to practical matters, we are not expecting a test of the building's fire alarm. So if the fire alarm does sound, could attendees please exit the building via the nearest exit. The rallying point is at the rear of the car park. I'd like to remind members of the committee to please raise their hand if they wish to speak and to ensure that their microphone is switched on when addressing an item for the benefit of the webcast and the recording and switched off when not. I'll refer to the scrutiny officer from Democratic Services if I need to record a vote or for any procedural matters. Thank you. And so moving first to apologies. Have we received any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, apologies have been received from Councillor Kevin Corby, Dawn Godfrey, Strategic Director for Children and Families, and Andreas Menzies, the Education Representative.
Thank you. This is to confirm the minutes of the Strategic Overview and Scrutiny Committee meetings held on the 25th of January and the 8th of February. Firstly, the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of January. Does anybody have any amendments they would like to make to the minutes? Nothing. I will therefore propose the minutes, and can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Payne. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's understood. All those against? And any abstentions? Two. Next, the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of February. Does anybody have any amendments they would like to make to the minutes? No. So I will propose the minutes, and can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Okay. All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor Powell. Actions arising. We had no actions from the meeting held in January and February, so we can go straight to agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Does any member have any interest to be declared this evening? No. Petitions, deputations, and questions. Have we received any petitions, deputations, or questions? Thank you. Questions with notice from members. Have we received any questions with notice from members? Item 7.
Oh, sorry.
It's fine. Did you get that? So that brings us to note. Have we covered questions with notice from members?
None received, Chair.
Notice of motions from members?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Consideration of any matter referred to committee in relation to the call-in of a decision. Have we received it?
Chair.
Thank you. So that brings us to the Scrutiny Committee recommendations and outcomes. At the committee's meeting on the 25th of January, we scrutinised the integrated budget plan and medium-term financial strategy for 2024-25 and 27-28. This resulted in the Scrutiny Committee providing comments and views to Cabinet at its meeting on the 13th of February. Details of the comments and views plus the response from Cabinet are enclosed in the agenda pack. Does anybody have any comments or questions? There are none. Thank you. I would like to draw this discussion therefore to a close. We move then to item 10, review of the work plan. The committee's current work plan for 2023-24 is enclosed in the agenda pack, along with a list of proposed items of the committee to scrutinise. We discussed a number of changes at the last meeting, and these have been incorporated into the pending items list as agreed. Using the paper process detailed in the pending items list, the committee must agree which items, if any, from the list should be added to its work plan. Items must be prioritised to ensure that the scrutiny committee process adds value and drives improvement. Before we get to any suggested amendments or questions, can I say that I think it would be useful if we had many more pending ideas from individual members and not just from this committee. This would also ensure that we make best use of our front-end meetings in any given year, where there is less emphasis on statutory work. And any thoughts on this before we move to a wider discussion and questions? Councillor Payne. Any suggestions as to how that might be best affected? They would be most welcome. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very good point you've made, and I take that on board. Has anybody else got any other thoughts? No. So, are there any other questions or items for the review of the work plan? Councillor Stevenson. So you bring that forward to the next meeting as a proposal?
Yeah.
A seconder.
I can come. Committee.
Yes, I think I can assist them up front. And so therefore there being council, beg your pardon. No, I think that's very interesting. And then for the sake of transparency, I'm also intending to bring forward at the next meeting a proposal in respect of the discretionary fund and local council tax support. So, yes, Councillor Powell.
It is later on the agenda, but talk about it.
Yes.
It should remain on the list whilst
That seems logical, particularly given the fact it's going to be in two stages. So unless there are any other questions. Sorry, the committee requested certain contextual information, essentially the actual and assumed numbers of pupils, to support the paper included in the pack, and I'm assuming that this will be provided as part of the presentation. So, Councillor Smith, would you like to introduce the item? That's fine.
Thank you, and good evening. Yes, as Councillor Smith has said, this is just to give people an overview. If people require more data, then obviously we can let people have that as we, but I think if we've gone through the presentation first, then we can have a look at what data people think they might need in addition. Jane, please. So the aim of this presentation is to provide you with an update on how the local authority's special educational needs provision is being reviewed to ensure it's meeting the needs of children and young people in our area. It's within our statutory responsibility to ensure that we maintain a review regularly. And so this is part of our duty to do so. And then we'll also update the scrutiny on the intention and implementation of the Delivering Better Value programme.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Colwynda. On this slide, what I'd really like to share with you is a population increase of Rutland. As you can see there, we've had a 9.7% increase since 2011 and 2021. And although we're very small, this is a larger increase than the national average of 6.6%. And the significance of that really is that with an increased population, there is a possibility of an increase in the number of children and adults with special educational needs. So just sort of setting the context there, we're not in an area that's exclusively over and above increase. As you can see there, Market Harborough and Northamptonshire have considerably large percentage increases as well. But in comparative to our size, that is quite a significant increase. Thank you. Next slide, please.
So our aim. As we've said, one of the key aims of the Delivering Better Value and of our work forwards is that Rutland parents and carers will be confident that their child's needs can be met in their local community when this is in the best interests of the child. And this is very much central to it. It has got to be in the best interest of the child. And there will always be some children who require very specific specialist provision. We'll know we've achieved this when parents are confident that their child's educational needs can be met in the local mainstream early years setting or school. Oh, thanks, Jane. That children thrive in their mainstream provision, achieving educationally, socially and emotionally, and are well prepared for adulthood, and that is key. High quality specialist provision is accessible for those children whose needs require an identified specialist approach. And we'll know this when mainstream education providers are confident in meeting the needs of all groups of children, ensuring that ordinarily available provision is embedded in daily, everyday practice. And that's really important. And that the reasonable adjustments are considered and implemented swiftly when this is required. And as you refer to the health being key within this, because it is about education, health and social care colleagues are working together to make an effective contribution to the early and accurate identification of additional need, and that the delivery is well planned and timely, and that there is a clear expectation for shared accountability of impact. And working together in that way is key to this delivery moving forwards.
So what do we want to do and how are we going to do this? Next slide, please. We really want to make sure that every child that has an education, health and care plan has a feeling of belonging in their local community. So to enable that feeling of belonging, we really need to ensure that our local settings, be they early years or schools, are able to support the various range of needs. And in doing this, what we're also like to do is ensure that the children with SEND are living in their home community or close to their home community as possible, allowing their needs to be met appropriately. Next slide, please. Now, in this slide, there's quite a few bits of information. So if I take them section by section, the green columns across the year span represent the number of education, health and care plans. So you would have heard Councillor Smith talk about 2019 having 197 plans and 2024 having 342. So we can see the steady rise over the 6-year period. The second thing that I'd like to point out to you is the orange columns. Now, these are children aged from 5 to 10 years old, and you will see that over the years, the orange column is growing steadily. But the point to note here really is 2021 and 2022, which are the COVID years. So what we suspect there, and we don't actually have the data to back this at the moment because it will require a deep dive, but we suspect that through COVID, there was an increased request of plans for children attending primary schools. If we now move on to the grey column, what we have there are children aged from 11 to 15. And again, you can see that across each year group, the numbers increase. But in particular, I draw your attention to 2023 and 24. These are the years after COVID, and we suspect that the isolation of being at home and the younger adults going back to school and the social, emotional, mental well-being of those young children were being displayed in a further request of plans for social, emotional, mental health. So those two are the reasons we've singled those out. The final thing on this graph is that if we add the orange and the grey columns together, so that's age groups from 5 to 15, we have 70% of the population within that year group being accounted for in just those two age groups. Next slide, please. So in this slide, what we have are the list of the primary needs that are often requested as part of our education, health and care plans. So the ones that are highlighted in a different colour are the ones that are asked most frequently. Next slide, please. Again, this is a slide that has multiple data aspects on it. The four most common needs in order of most frequently requested are shown as autism spectrum disorder, social, emotional, mental health, followed by moderate learning difficulties, and finally speech language communication needs. So in essence, all of our children from the last 6-year period will have one of those four required needs as their primary area of request for a plan. And again, if you look at the red column, what that signifies is that within each year group, those numbers represent between 70 and 80% of the requests for plans each of the year. So really, what we're trying to demonstrate here is that if we can support our schools to better, or our settings, should I say, because it's not only schools, if we can support our settings to be better equipped to support these particularly four areas of need, what we have is a possibility of supporting greater number of children in our ordinarily available offer. Next slide, please. This slide talks about where our children are. So again, what we have is the green slides. The green is 2024. And in essence, I just draw your attention to the fact that unlike many other local authorities, Rutland is unique in as much that most of its children are educated in a mainstream setting that have a plan. The difficulty that we have is that we're seeing year on year more complexity in our children, and therefore our non-maintained specialist provision has also increased. Those are the very specialist schools that we have where our young people have multiple complex needs. So really, that slide, basically, those are the 2 points to really point out there. Next slide, please. And this slide basically lists the young people by year group, and transition tends to be a key area where we suspect, again, further deep dive is necessary, but we suspect that transition years also cause certain anxiety, and a request of plans potentially might be the reason for the increases there. Next slide, please. And this is a snapshot of one year's data, just showing you where most of our children end up. And as I've mentioned before, mainstream academies have the highest number in attendance, followed by our specialist units. So units attached to our mainstream schools are the next highest at 63. And although our non-maintained special schools are 30, they probably account for the most expensive residential placements or day placements. Next slide, please.
So this basically is just a summary of the information on the information on the slides that you've just been given. But, you know, as it says, overall Rutland numbers reflect national trends. And this has increased each year since 2010 from our latest published data. So as we can see, and as from what Carla was saying, is the fact that we are seeing more children being educated within Rutland mainstream settings. I think one of the things that we do have to be slightly wary of is just referring to in Rutland and out of Rutland. And some of what we're starting to talk about much more is about children being educated within their local community, because actually their local community may just be over the border if they're living on the edge of, you know, if you're living in Great Casterton or you know, on the borders in Uppingham, it might be actually your nearest provider is not actually in Rutland. So I think one of the pieces of work that we are starting to look at is actually how far the travel to school distances are, because we think that's going to be a really important piece of information. So hopefully we'll be able to report on that before too long. So the actions that we're taking. We've got in Rutland, in our mainstream schools, we actually have a range of available offers. We're in Oakham Primary School, we've got the designated specialist provision. This is for children with cognition and learning needs or communication and interaction needs, and just provides those opportunities for those children to have some specialist time, but also to be able to integrate with the mainstream primary school. We have the Edith Weston Primary Nurture Hub, which is more for children with social and emotional mental health attachment difficulties. And it is more of a nurture approach and just provides children with a very warm, welcoming space. And it also offers outreach support to other Rutland primary schools. But again, that just provides those opportunities for children to be in a safe space to develop, to work with adults on just developing their own self-esteem and their mental, working on, you know, their emotional health, and then returning back into mainstream education. And then in the three secondary provisions, we've got Catmus College, which has a designated specialist provision with children with cognition and learning needs, and also with some low to moderate behavioural support and sensory needs, because it's very rare that children actually only have, they may have a primary need, but they will also potentially have a number of other secondary needs beneath that. Then in Uppingham Community College, more recently, we've had the Mainstream Plus, which is where young people are primarily engaged in a mainstream offer, but they have additional support. That means they can go and have smaller tutor groups, smaller times away from the mainstream classes, and just helps them to build some of their social and emotional strength, but also helps to develop cognition and learning. And then we've also got the enhanced resource provision, which is where children spend more time actually in that provision and slowly move into developing those activities in mainstream, possibly with sports or arts or those types of activities. And then we've got the Supporting Schools Partnership in primary and secondary schools. And that is very much aimed at children who've been identified as having an additional need, but not yet having an EHCP. And it just helps to support the staff and the young people in just some of those additional specialist provisions. Colwynda, do you want to give an example of some of the specialist teacher work? And
Certainly, yes. Apologies. Under delivering better value, next slide, please. What we have is a programme of work from the Department of Education, and this area of grant is actually applied to 55 local authorities that find themselves in a deficit of their high needs budget. And fundamentally, the money or the grant is given to change the way we currently do things. So every local authority that's been given a DFE grant for delivering better value will actually be required to create a plan of change. And what we have here is the plans that Rutland are going to be or are implementing now. In the summer of 2023, we had a deep dive by Newton Europe, who were the consultants directed by the DFE to really look at the data. And Newton Europe identified 4 key areas that they felt were probably the core reason for the increase in the plans. One area was parental confidence or lack of in young people's needs being able to be met in the ordinarily available provision, i.e. our normal settings. And then the possibilities of how they could possibly enhance that would be through a specialist team, perhaps supporting those settings, some early intervention support from early years to families, and so that we could really pick up those children at a very early stage. And finally, to make sure that we had data to underpin the direction of travel, but also to add the evidence-based practice that's so keen in ensuring that change is inevitable. So the plan was put together in November of last year and really covers those 4 areas. Next slide, please. Now, this is what the work plan in essence covers. It has 3 core pieces of a jigsaw or cogs, if you like, working together. And the way we see it is that the specialist teams area of work and the early help and social care area of work will really drive the parental confidence. So in essence, what we're doing is investing in our schools, investing in early help and social care, with a view to really enhance parental confidence. And we're doing that by running inclusive work streams with families and young people around what they think an inclusive environment or a setting is, what sort of things they would feel would be appropriate and applicable in early years, what specialist provision they see would suit their children and young people, and obviously collecting the voice of children and young people themselves. So with regards to specialist teams, what we've done is we've actually identified from across our borders in Leicester City, highly qualified advisors. So these are advisors for SEND. Their role is to act as coordinators of the area, but not individual case level work. This is strategic level work. This is actually looking within schools to say, how are you supporting all of your SEND children, and where can we help you really enhance that practice? So it's very much at a strategic level. They will also be delivering autism education trust training to enable confidence within our schools to be able to support young people with autism, or this is diagnosed and undiagnosed young people that may be on the autism spectrum, and also speech language communication. So we're working very closely with our partners from Health, the ICB and the Leicestershire Health Partnership Trust to look at therapists to come in and create a tool that teachers could use to identify early signs of speech language communication, but also to provide support to those teachers so that they can support early signs of speech language communication once identified. So there's that sort of wraparound. So we're trying to sort of tick lots of different things, not only providing training, but also early identification. We've also employed an education, health and care plan quality lead for SEND. That person is doing a deep dive into education, health and care plans and really pulling out cases that are in year 4 and year 5 and looking at how those children are supported now. Because if you remember the slide that I alluded to, that most of the peaks in requests for plans are usually around transition years, we really want to make sure that if a young person is being well supported in primary settings, how can we continue that into secondary without them having to feel that the specialist unit in a specialist environment is the only place that could meet their needs. And they're also going to be responsible for setting up education, health and care plan audits. So these are going to be random checks into different plans with a multi-agency partnership group to look at how plans are actually being implemented. So are the child's needs being met within a setting? And we're also looking at those young people that are educated other than in a setting. So those ones that are educated at home, perhaps. And with regards to early help, we're going to be looking at a dedicated resource. And I say looking at, we've already have identified a person to work 1 day a week in Uppingham Family Hub to do the reach out work, where we're trying to really target families that perhaps feel that coming into Uppingham might be a bit of a trek. So we're trying to do outreach work and really supporting and navigating those families as early as possible to the services that they're quite rightly entitled to, perhaps don't know that. And yeah, so we really want to boost and enhance parental confidence through the range of measures. And we also want to make sure that our schools and settings are able to really step up to the challenge, feeling equipped and able to do so. Next slide, please.
And next. So the delivering better value. As Colwynda has sort of explained, that's what it's helped, what the contents of the value, delivering better value is. But basically, we want to support and empower settings and schools to confidently meet a greater range of special educational needs. And we want to increase the current school offer to be wider and in line with most reported needs. And so as a result, the DBV's planned initiatives aim to slow down the growth in EHCPs and reduce the high needs deficit. And the expected savings are shown below, but it will not, and Councillor Smith referred to this as well, it aims to arrest the deficit, but it will not return it to a balanced budget without significant change to government policy and to central government funding. So really, we want to just keep doing what we're doing and doing more of it. And just basically further enhancing more specialist provision within Rutland mainstream settings. That is actually, we're undertaking a detailed status report, and we've got an independent provider, SDSA, that's looking at the moment at doing a desktop exercise, looking at historic data, current data, and also potentially forecasting data as to what actually is it, what are the main primary needs, how are they being met, where are they being met, how much is it costing us, where are people travelling to, and then looking at what could be the best options going forward to make sure that we are actually doing the best that we can. That is, at the moment, as I said, is a desktop. The reviewer will also be talking to education providers, we'll be talking to parents and families, we'll be talking to specialist providers, and just really getting an understanding of what will be the best way of enhancing more specialist provision within Rutland, and improve the commissioning approaches as well for children who require specialist education provision, because we need to ensure that we are getting best value for money out of the provision that we are paying for. So the aim is to actively seek to build the capability which meets wider need within Rutland's mainstream education settings for those with SEND and increase parental confidence in the offer available within the community, so that children and young people with SEND can benefit from exceptional education nearer to their home, and the high needs funding can be used more effectively within and across Rutland. Any questions?
Councillor Carr, I think you got your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I've got quite a few questions, so I will slow them down. The first one is around parental confidence. I'd like to understand what you're doing around co-production with parents, because the way you are going to build confidence and bring those parents on the journey with you is by having a co-production approach. So that's one question. My second question is around who holds these schools accountable for what they are offering. I am going to give you a scenario. I am going to make it as anonymous as I possibly can. But I do have a family member who's a school teacher, as a primary school teacher. And in that class, it's a very large class. It's the largest class in the school. They have 8 children that have been identified with additional needs. 2 of the children require one-to-one support. They should be having 4 TAs in that school setting. I will say it is not in Rutland, and that's all I'm going to say, but it is on a boundary of our county. They should have 4 TAs in that class. They've got 1. So who holds the account for what provision is provided, given that we have got academies who, I don't know, looking at meeting cost efficiencies, etc., etc. And when I looked at some of your slides around the primary schools, I was really surprised at the limited offer. I'm sure that it's very good, but we've got a lot of primary schools in Rutland, and we've got a lot in Oakham. So I think of Brook Hill, Catmus Primary, who hold a lot of school children there. And given the stats that you gave around that, is provision enough as it is? And I noticed that you had figures around there's 30 places or there's 15 places. What happens when they are up to that provision? What I'm asking is, are numbers capped? Because in the column, there was like 30 places, 15 places. So I was just wondering if that was capped. But I think my point is around accountability, academies, and joint working with parents. Thank you.
Yep. You want to do? Chair, may I?
Please.
Thank you for your question, Councillor. With regards to co-production, all of our work is co-produced. We have a facilitator who is a practitioner in terms of she works for the council, but we have an independent person that comes in and facilitates parental groups. We work with our local Parent Carer Forum and 2 other parent organisations. It's called Parental Collaborative. All work streams that I've mentioned earlier are co-produced with the Parent Collaborative. We're directed by them in terms of the area of need. So this data is shared with them and they contribute actively to that. With regards to your second question about school accountability, that's a difficult one, because if it is an academy, it's very difficult to hold an academy to account unless you're part of the DFE. But I will leave that to colleagues who are more learned than I am to come in on that.
You want me to just...
Yes, please.
I mean, one of the things that obviously within the annual review of an EHCP, it will be, the questions will be to the school about how has this provision been met and how has this provision been met? And we should be looking for evidence of how that provision has been met. I mean, obviously we can't stand in the classrooms and count the TAs. But, you know, that is a question that we would be asking, and certainly case officers working with families would be asking if the families have any concern about those needs being met. And also I have regular meetings with the DFE, and I also have regular meetings with Ofsted, and it's a really good conduit for our concerns to be shared. We don't have right of entry into academies, but we can raise concerns, we can raise issues. We have done so recently, and I'm aware that the regional director, which is the DFE, the Old Regional Schools Commissioner, has been in contact with that school. So there is a conduit, but as we, you know, we can't go into every classroom and check, but there are means of assurances that we can do.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Tracy. I mean, it's just to come back on the TAs. Have visited secondary schools, and the principals tell me they have a lot of trouble attracting TAs because of the poor pay.
Yeah.
They get better pay, staffing shells, etc., and that's an issue. And also school costs.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what I'm alluded to. I know that there's a workforce issue around recruitment and retention of training assistants. And they are also trying to balance the books in terms of meeting the costs and what they, you know, what revenue they bring in. So I know it's a challenge. So, you know, I just wanted to highlight that really.
Councillor Edwards, did you raised your hand earlier?
Sorry, Councillor,
Councillor-
can you put your
Can you-
microphone.
Your microphone. Oh, so.
Sorry, I just wanted to know, the third question that you'd asked was around capping. There's those figures that were listed on there are not about caps. They're about the number of children where they are per year group. So nothing to do. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, my question was to Councillor Smith and our guests as well. Was the first thing that you said was that there was an increase. It was a number of million I didn't write down, and then it's gone up to 2.4, and it's projected then, if we follow that trajectory, to be 16 million. But you also said that the reason possibly we were seeing this increase was partly pandemic and partly parental controls, of, you know, taking control and knowing more about their children and recognizing that. So to me, as a scientist, that's a curve that's going to flatten off, not one that's just going to keep going up like that. But that, sorry, the second part of the question is, there's a plan to reduce the EHCPs. My question is, how do you reduce the kids have, if they have the issues, they have the issues. You can't just make those go away by saying you don't have that sheet of paper anymore that says you have that. Sorry.
Yes. Please.
Well, I was just going to say that we did say at the end that the reduction of EHCPs could only flatten that curve off. If you notice the slide, it did say that it will only be a change in policy or government policy or government putting more funds in will be really get it right down. That's, I think, the basis of it. Jill, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think what you're saying was with the impact of the pandemic and parental choice, that will peak and then it will flatten, I think was what you, which, I mean, we take into account general trends nationally that we're seeing as well, and the national trends are still pointing up, keeping going up. But yes, but the other question was, sorry.
It was just saying that there might be reasons why it's going up, but you want it to go down. But the fact is that those children haven't magically been fixed.
No, What we're hoping, well, aiming for through the improvements to earlier identification, more accurate identification, earlier intervention and support within schools, it'll be the number of children who are identified as requiring an EHCP in order to have their needs met. So it's for those, there will be children whose needs will always have to be met through an EHCP. We're not going to say we wouldn't have EHCPs, but there are perhaps, and not just in Rutland, data has been, and part of our deep dive work is looking at what point was it decided that the child needed an EHCP, and what else at that time could have been an intervention that could have been used instead. And that's a national picture, it's not just a Rutland picture, is that there are a lot of children sitting in schools with an EHCP who, if they presented with that same concern now, their needs could be met without the EHCP. So it's not about taking an EHCP away from a child who already has one. It's about reducing the number of children who require an EHCP in order to have their needs met going forwards. Is that?
Councillor Payne?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the good work you're doing. It sounds great. Some really good analysis there as well, I think. Just one question from me. Watching the costs go down and the budget reduce is good. But how do you measure the benefit how do you measure your success? How do you know what benefit you're actually delivering to the school, the parents and the child through what you're doing? How do you evidence that?
Please.
What we're trying to do is, as I started off with, evidence-based practice. So we have a baseline of where we are. We know where we are at the moment. We know what we're implementing. What we will be doing is regular assessments of where we are. So 3, 6, 9 months time, we will be looking at, so what difference has this made? And we will be talking to families, we'll be talking to young people, and we'll be talking to settings. So we're constantly doing the plan, do, review cycle of events that schools are very used to doing, but we as a local authority and a local area really need to get used to doing, which is why in one of the slides I talked about data being absolutely critical, because that's going to be our driving force.
Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Actually, just to follow up on Councillor Edwards' questions, and I'm sorry if I'm not an expert in this field, so if I'm not grasping some of the basics, can you just tell me, and I may have missed it, what percentage of children in our schools have a ECHP? And you talked about that trend of that developing. And I'm sorry, but I'm still failing to understand if is the logic then, if parents feel that the child's needs are being met, that they won't apply for an sorry, I keep getting the letters the wrong way around, EHCP. I'm sorry, I'm failing to understand how reducing the number makes a difference to the cost, because as Councillor Edwards has said, the child's needs are still there. They may not have the formal plan that identifies their needs, but surely but their needs are still there and still need to be provided for. Does that make sense, or have I missed a bit of I can't understand that relationship, just because we reduce the number of plans, why does that reduce the cost? It's a fundamental thing I'm struggling with. Thank you.
Jill, would you like me to? Right. So fundamentally, what we're trying to do is enable most needs to be met at the point of early identification. The reason most families require a plan is because needs have been left to drift, and therefore the needs increase and become perhaps worse than they should have been or could have been if they were identified earlier and supported better. The idea of what we're trying to do is not say plans aren't needed. Plans are definitely needed if they're definitely needed. But the idea is that if we can intervene sooner, we can perhaps support the child better without having to wait for a plan, because waiting for a plan and getting all the services in place causes delay to the child's development and learning. So this is a way of trying to support a young person sooner with the right interventions. And if so, after 6 to 9 months, it's deemed that a plan is still needed, then absolutely they move on to a plan. It's by no means saying that this replaces having a plan. It basically enables a better start in life and a better opportunity to have your needs met sooner. So that's where we're aiming with the work that we're doing.
Okay, so what you're basically saying is earlier identification of those needs.
Can I just help with a scenario? So you're saying, for example, a child who's got speech and language difficulties, as an example, and we've seen a lot of that in the pandemic, and that really, the people really struggled. So an early intervention around getting a speech and language therapist at an earlier age will then could potentially prevent them from needing. So I think that's probably a good example of an early intervention.
Please.
And what we have found as well nationally is that children with communication delay often then become to have behavioural issues because they feel they're frustrated because they can't actually communicate, and therefore their behaviours become more extreme, and we end up also with higher exclusions linked quite often to those early communication issues not being identified and addressed. But the other thing as well is that with increasing the number of children who are able to access mainstream education, we should also, even if they've got, yes, there were children who, they will still have needs that don't necessarily come through in the HCP, so there will still be costs associated, but they won't necessarily have to be at high cost placements in specialist provision, and that they will be met within the ordinarily available or reasonable adjustments made within a primary or secondary school or an early years provision, so that wider cost will be, it won't be necessarily taken away completely, but will be lowered. So it's not necessarily, it won't be this is a sweeping, clearing of the EHCPs, but it'll be these EHCPs are providing perhaps a lower cost, more effective, more beneficial to the child, because they're more focused on the child's actual needs, but it's because they've been identified much earlier. So does that help at all?
Please, if you want to add to the answer.
Just to sort of take your example one step further, with the training that the schools will be getting, the school Senkos and the schools as a whole, or a setting as a whole, through the advisory teachers, the speech language communication example is a really good one, because what you'll be having are practitioners that are familiar with the young person, see the person day in and day out. They'll be able to identify very early on that actually this person isn't developing as they should be with regards to meeting milestones around communication. What can I try to support this? So there's a universal offer of support that they will immediately be able to offer. If that doesn't work, they can move to the next level because they would have been given the training. So what we call the targeted level, where we're working in smaller, more focused groups to support those needs. And if that doesn't work, then at least you have the evidence to go to the speech and language therapist and say, we've tried A and B, it's not working, this is the evidence, this is why you need to see him. At the moment, what we're seeing are schools or settings referring to specialists on things that they're not familiar with and not very clear of. And then the specialists are saying, we can't actually support this person's assessment because we've got a backlog. We've got too many cases. So who's losing out? It's a child that's losing out because they're on a waiting list, not having any intervention. What we're trying to do is get in early with the intervention, collect the evidence, then they go to specialists if that's what they need. So it's more of a tiered approach. I don't know if that helps.
Have you any questions? Well, I think had more time than others. Have you got a question?
Yeah, it was just one question and then just a couple of observations. Am I still correct in saying that children living in rural areas get less per capita funding than a child living in an urban area? So I think, and obviously it's a bit different now with academisation, that central government, presumably the Department for Education, gives a certain amount per child to the school, which is why it's difficult for schools with an army cohort, for example, to get their funding because they have to do it based on July numbers.
Yes.
And I think the urban funding is slightly more than
There is,
rural.
it's based on, I'm trying to think what is the something funding formula.
National funding formula.
Yes, there's the national funding formula, and then there's
Yeah.
the weighted pupil
Scarcity
figures and
value,
things, and
etc.
yes. So not individual school by school, but area by area, yes.
And so therefore it works out that Rutland children get less funding, and this isn't a go, I am building to a point. So we are starting from the point that our schools, and I speak as somebody who's taught in inner city Cambridge and also Rutland, general teaching assistant support, which I know, Tracy, you've touched on. Generally, there are more teaching assistants in urban areas than rural areas. So the point I'm about to make, the principle of what I'm hearing this evening is absolutely right. Fundamentally, we need an inclusive society, and actually that training around whole school ethos, how you incorporate things. I remember things many moons ago, for example, dyslexia, actually spelling techniques that will really benefit children who may have dyslexia actually are also really good for anybody to learn spelling. Great training, etc. The point I'm about to make, though, is we've already got a teaching profession that is absolutely on its knees. I've not yet met a teacher, or indeed a teaching assistant, who doesn't absolutely want children to flourish and do their best. There are only so many hours in a day. And my concern in a Rutland setting, and I think having that sort of specialist training, very, very important. Sometimes it is a case of simply having the extra pair or pairs of hands in the classroom. And if you don't have that, what you have described without identifying a school, I have experienced actually with very little TA support at all. And it really is very, very difficult. So my concern, sorry, Chair, I am being long-winded, it is around the support also needs to be pairs of hands in the classroom. And I agree, Councillor Carr, academisation is very difficult to hold schools to account now, but the buck sits with the local education authority. And as you know, Mrs. Curtis, I do not approve of that situation. Apologies, Chair, that was long-winded.
Just going back to the funding issue, it is something that we've been lobbying, and we'd be grateful for anybody else who will lobby. Rutland does, the funding reflects deprivation. And because of Rutland's not so strong deprivation figures, we do lose out. And we find this right from early years funding, the funding formula for the early years support, right the way through special needs, just general school funding. It is an issue, and it is something that, you know, we would be grateful for anybody who wishes to support that and raise that to do so, please.
Chair, could I also make a point that children with special needs are not confined to children who are deprived economically? And my concern in Rutland, and it is absolutely from personal experience, apologies if that should be an interest, there are children who wouldn't hit deprivation targets, as we know, but they also have every right to the educational support so that they can achieve their best. And might I make a proposal, Chair, which might need tweaking? I don't know if this panel would be minded to write a letter either to the MP or the Ministry of Education, sort of basically summarising that Rutland as a rural area is setting off on the back foot purely because of that method of applying a funding formula, similar to the council tax.
I'll just a moment, Tim. I agree with those sentiments, and so I suppose by way of declaration of interest, my wife is head of department in a large secondary school in inner city. So I don't come at this without my ear having been bent over many years. Could I just ask one question, which I think follows on from what Councillor Carr and Councillor Stevenson have asked, and it's very much in terms of the adequacy of resources. I was slightly surprised at the number of £1 million, and so I have a concern about resources. So my question is this: why is the graduated response not applied consistently in Rutland schools presently?
A question we have asked.
Indeed, you did. I thought it.
Graduated response.
Well, it is from primary, from the very get go. It goes back to the principles of Warnock, doesn't it? That's all that we're actually talking about here, and that's more years ago than I care to remember, frankly.
I don't know.
Yeah, and that is what we're talking about here this evening. And a lot of it is a lot of the failures of Warnock were around a failure to invest adequate resources. Now, one can argue about the appropriateness of Warnock, but the basic at root, the issue was one of Warnock.
You have to explain it because everybody's looking.
But Baroness Warnock's report into the provision of special educational needs for children in the UK. It was something that was done in the early 80s when my wife did her masters. So that's the only reason I know about it. So it's the Warnock report. So sorry. Would you like just to answer that very simple question that I played
I'm not
back
going to
to
be
you?
held
Just
responsible for the Warnock report.
perish the thought.
No, but in terms of the graduated response, that is key to the work that we're actually focusing on at this point in time, because it is key. It is the fact that there is a universal offer that schools and early years settings, well, anybody who works with children really should be part of. Every teacher is a teacher of SEND. And I think we have to remember that is in the teacher's standards. And that every schools are expected to meet the needs of the children in their class wherever this is possible. And I think we have lost sight of that. And that is the universal offer. There is, if there's any head teachers in the room, I duck when I say this. Schools are given a notional £6,000 to meet the additional needs of children. What that actually looks like in a school's budget, as an ex-head teacher, I'm not even going to start, but that theoretically is there. Yes. But there are, and then it becomes, there's that more specialist, very specialist and highly specialist approach. And that's what we're really trying to get schools to think more about, is what can they offer in that ordinarily available, or with some reasonable adjustments. And I think that's what would, but horses to water, I'm afraid.
Indeed. Are there any other questions? Councillor Payne.
Thank you. I think it doesn't belong to your department, but does this have a knock-on impact on home to school transport and any reduction in budget there?
Not directly, but
Yes.
yes, it is something we're working very closely with the transport team and looking at how we can utilise the transport budget to the best effect. But it's not something we're directly responsible for.
Okay. Another question for Christine, maybe.
Yes, it is. But
Yeah.
I'm working with her on send transport costs. I mean, they're a major issue, not just for us, but for local authorities up and down the country. And it's a difficult one to solve.
Yes.
So yeah,
You will know that from things I've recently been involved in, but I would have thought I'm just pleased that you're working together, because if you're pulling it all into local places, that should have an impact on that budget. Yeah.
I was trying to say something a bit earlier on. Yes, sorry, don't bother. I just wanted to stand up for education in Rutland. We'll be talking about, we don't get enough funds. But our secondary schools, do very well educationally. Their attainments are well above the national average, and I think that should be recognised. I just want to go back a little bit as well, also to talk about the trajectory of trying to intervene earlier to stop progression, so that things don't get worse and worse and worse and require a lot of input later on. A lot of work was put into the earlier settings, such as speech and language therapy, specialist teachers, and that did produce results. And that has started, that started earlier than this change program. So I just wanted to flag that up.
Stephen.
So I've got two questions. The first one, thank you for the presentation. Perhaps links to what Councillor Carl was saying earlier. I was until recently a governor at UCC, and I saw how great the work Mainstream Plus was doing and it's grown over the years, and it's really brilliant. It's fully support it. But if there isn't perhaps a cap on it, there's certainly a limit to the resource available and the facilities. Are you confident that there's the resource to sort of expand that scheme and other schemes if the need continues to grow? Because while we might not put a cap on it, we still have to be able to fit those children in and educate them. And the second question is, and this could be fully naive and unrelated, but if there's still some work within around parental confidence, have you seen an increase in parents not having that confidence and taking their kids out of the system altogether and homeschooling? And in those cases, what support can we offer, and what do we know about sort of homeschooling in Rutland? Just an overview. I know it's probably a big question, but is it a bad thing or a good thing? Are we supporting it? Are we happy with it?
Please.
I haven't actually I can't get on the internet. I was just trying to find some other data, but I can't. I'll do the homeschooling one first. We do have children electively home educated, but the numbers are reasonably low. And we work very closely with, because at the moment we don't have the right, there isn't a register as such at the moment. It is working towards that way, hopefully. But we do have a good relationship with the coordinator of the sort of the forum of electively home educated families. We do have a right to check that they have a suitable education, and we are working to make sure with parents to make sure that that is the case, and we support where we can as well. But it is. We do try to check. I mean, parents don't have to tell us why they're choosing to electively home educate, but quite often it's an ethical reason. Sometimes it's a health reason. But it is some more work that we're doing, is just to really make sure that we are those. We have a meeting with head teachers. We had one this afternoon with our secondary head teachers, where we look at young people who are at risk of not being in education. We call it our Rutland Education Access Board. It's where those schools can come and we talk, the 3 secondary schools particularly, we sit and we talk with our attendants, colleagues and colleagues from the school support programme, and we look at how we can support those children who are at risk of not being in education. So that sort of helps us to understand if there's a reason for a child potentially to be, but sometimes parents can just make that decision. But yes, so, and then the other question was about UCC and generally about one of the outcomes of the detailed status report will be to enable us to look at what resources we have available and how we can best use them. And part of that, and actually the head teacher from Uppingham Community College is one of the heads that's talking to the independent reviewer tomorrow, and is looking at what other alternative, and I'm using the phrase alternative provision lowercase, not as a place, not as a destination, but an intervention. And what alternative provision could we be putting in place? Is it more of Mainstream Plus and the enhanced resource provision, or is it something else as well? Because we started with the enhanced resource, then we actually, school developed the Mainstream Plus, which was the sort of the bit that was missing in the middle. Is there something else, or is it more of the same? And I think so we are looking at expanding an offer, but we need to ensure that it's the right offer and it's based on what the data is telling us. And I don't just mean, number data, it's what the evidence is telling us from what we're talking to families, talking to schools, settings, talking to young people. What is it that would make it better, and how do we ensure where we can? Because obviously, going back to resource, there isn't a finite amount of money kicking around waiting for us to do it, but with the money we have, how can we use it best?
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, just to go back to home education, I was recently on a meeting of Leeds, Children's Leeds, the East Midlands Board, Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, Leicestershire, and I think Northamptonshire. And there was a presentation by someone doing some research on this. I'm sorry, I can't remember the figures, but there was a worrying increase in some areas of home education. So it's good to hear it's not in Rutland. And they tried to look at the reasons, and he was saying that there is a cohort of parents who are home educated have very good reasons, and understood it, and obviously do the job properly. They tried to engage with all the others who, I think it was 70% who didn't respond. So it was worrying as to what their reasons were. So I'm sorry, I can't give you the figures because it was, but I can give you those from the minutes, I guess. So yeah.
Sorry, could I just add? Sorry, I was just going to say about, we do have some young people who are non-attending because of emotional issues at the moment, but we are supporting those through a project, the ANA project, so that we're very much involved with those young people and those families, because that is linked to their mental health. But that isn't an electively home educated, but they're just non-attending at the moment because of their health, but they're still on roll at a school. But I just thought I'd just add those in, sorry.
Okay, I've actually got one final question. And this comes from a number of parents who wrote to my colleague and I in connection with the closure of the parks. And it comes back to this business about EHCPs. So presently EHCPs guarantees the provision and standard of support in the event that the change does not deliver the required service needed. How long will it take for an EHCP to be established versus the current timescales from referrals? Because there is a lot of concern about the time that has been taken to establish EHCPs. And if we are to gain public confidence in what is happening, and let's hypothetically say that does not come to pass in all instances, it behoves us that the response times for the provision of EHCP plans is more prompt.
Sorry, just having a quick conflab there of the if an assessment for an EHCP is requested, the local authority has 20 weeks in which to respond, up to 20 weeks in which to respond. However, there can be some delays in that, but that is because the local authority has to wait for specialist assessments to be included, which include educational psychologist assessments. And there is a backlog at the moment with some of those educational psychologist assessments. However, the local authority has a statutory duty to respond in a fixed period of time. One of the things that we're looking at within the change programme itself is actually that process and looking at the EHCP process. But there is, it's a national, well, certainly in English, expectation of 20 weeks.
Thank you. Unless, Councillor Edwards.
Just to add,
Last question,
last-
positively.
it was just to add on to that. In that case, does it not make sense? Because I have friends who have children going through the system. They've actually chosen to go to homeschooling. Why do we choose not to put them straight into the process that you've just admitted takes a really long time as soon as we possibly can, rather than saying we won't bother to put them into the the process to that long drawn out process to get your EHCP. The words.
The words.
Yes. So why don't you put them in as soon as you can if you know it's going to take 20 weeks? Is all.
I think the answer is the costs associated with it. That's because at root, it all comes back to resources and costs, and this is about seeking to reduce those costs. So I could see you're itching to respond. Please do.
Part of it is actually just making sure that the evidence is in place as well, so that when it does go to an assessment, that all of the evidence is ready, so that when it comes to the assessment, that the plan is, if it's required, is then issued. But what we don't want is to go through that 20-week process and then to go to the board, and the board said, but you haven't got this, you haven't got that, you haven't got that, and you go back to the beginning again. So it makes sense for, you know, what is the issue? What have we done so far? What's the specialist support? What's health saying? What's the educational psychologist saying? What will be the need of that young person? What will that EHCP say that they would require going forwards? If we can get all of that information, start that process, get to the end of that process and issue the plan if it's required, it's a much better way. So sometimes it's the delay is getting the evidence base and making sure that then when the plan is issued, it's the correct plan. Because actually, if the provision identified in the plan isn't reflecting the child's actual needs, it's not worth having the plan.
Okay, thank you. It was odd. And that I will.
Please.
Sorry, councillor Payne, you need to come to the table,
Come
please.
to the table, or you'll be in the.
It's a pause. Won't go like that. Okay, thank you. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Come here. I don't know if people are aware, but there is no national register of the children who are currently home educated in this country. As a nation, we don't know how many children there are, where they are, or why they are being home educated, which for a Western democracy is ridiculous, completely unsustainable, and also opens all sorts of questions for child abuse, safeguarding issues, and the like. So one of the things that this committee could do would be to put its shoulder to the wheel behind the idea of getting the government to make a national register of all the children that are home educated. That won't go down well, but it's absolutely essential if we're not to have another scandal 10 years down the line.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Ray Payne, for that very useful and helpful intervention, and we will note it. And resume, please resume your seat. You know your way there, right? Sorry. Could I thank you for a very interesting and informative presentation, and also the way you so freely answered the questions that we've asked of you this evening. I think I speak for the committee. It's been an excellent discussion this evening. So,
Oh, sorry, Chair. Well, sorry, it was about the letter. Do we need to vote on that proposal that we would be writing a letter regarding
well,
the
I would be supportive of that. And can we?
Sorry, Chair, the committee needs to agree it and agree who's going to write it.
So we need to agree.
That the committee wants to send a letter.
Yes, no, sorry, but we're not going to be doing the drafting here. We need to agree the
no, I think
principle.
it's just
We
a
need to agree the
delegated.
principle.
Yeah.
So can we agree the principle that we will, following this meeting this evening, we will draft a letter to our local MP setting out the concerns arising from this discussion this evening, and so that's the motion that I'm asking you to consider.
Sorry, the proposal was for the scrutiny committee to write to the MP and the Ministry of Education lobbying for extra funding.
Yes.
Lobbying for it.
Yeah, fair fund.
That's fine. Sorry, I apologise for my memory lapse. So I'm proposing that, and I therefore seek a seconder. Councillor Powell. All those in favour? What was that?
Sorry, you said the seconder was myself. In fact, it was councillor
I
Stevenson.
beg your pardon.
I
It
think.
was Councillor
Oh, no,
Stevens.
sorry.
Because we look quite similar, Chair.
All right. My eyesight's not that bad. Right. Yes, so following that piece of additional business, then the committee is recommended to note the increase in numbers of children requiring educational health and care plans and the implications of this on the high needs budget, and to note the actions being taken with the aim to deliver better value and increase parental confidence in the local education provision. And I'll propose the recommendations, and do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. All those in favour, please raise your hands. I believe that's unanimous. Thank you. So therefore it is resolved that the committee has A, noted the increase in numbers of children requiring education, health and care plans and the implications of this on the high needs budget. B, noted the actions being taken with the aim to deliver better value and increase parental confidence in their local education provision. Thank you. Thank you for your time this evening. Brings us to item 12 on the agenda, the scrutiny improvement plan. The next item is the review and approval of the scrutiny improvement plan. Following the review of its scrutiny process, Council recommended that the Strategic Overview and Scrutiny Committee should develop and implement an improvement plan. The scrutiny officer has produced a detailed draft improvement plan for 23-24 for our approval. Before we do that, I have a few observations on the plan. Under training item 2, can I recommend from personal experience the bite-sized training sessions offered by East Midlands? Under work programme item 4, I've already mentioned the desirability of having more work proposals from members, and Lucy and I have offered to assist in preparing proposals in the past. I also think that we need to be clear why we are considering items where no recommendations are expected or required. Under public engagement, item 5, I think if we used more evidence sessions, and I appreciate the experience to date is somewhat limited, this would, by their institution, facilitate more direct public engagement. And then I would like to draw the committee's attention to scrutiny self-reflection item 6, where Johnny Nomates will say a few words. So I've taken time to get to grips with local authority procedures, and I did not recognise the importance of gathering work ideas quickly to provide a broader work plan to select from. And I believe, as I mentioned earlier, that that's important in terms of balancing the workload of this committee. And lastly, I recognise the importance of establishing lines of questioning as a committee in the pre-meeting. So those are my observations. Does anybody have any comments or questions on the report as drafted?
Oh,
Councillor Stevens.
yeah, it was just on item 6, or I'm actually going to zoom that because I can't read it at the minute. So on the no committee members volunteered to work with the chair on producing a draft improvement plan. Can I apologise profusely because I was unaware of being invited to do that, which might have meant that I missed a meeting at some point. Because I would most certainly have volunteered with great enthusiasm.
Right. I thought it was beautifully drafted, that. Anyway, there we go. Any other observations? Councillor Powell.
Sorry, Chair, I'm a bit confused about this item now. So are you saying this is the improvement plan here?
Yes, this is what the council recommended.
What I
But
can
I'm-
confirm is that the improvement plan was for 23-24, so it should have come into effect at our first meeting. This is now the completed improvement plan of all the actions that have been done by the committee during the year to help improve it and make it better. Does that make sense?
Good news, Chair. I can see some items for 24-25.
Excellent, there you go.
Yes, thank you. So there are some in red are the ones that we actually haven't achieved.
Yeah, the last one. Yeah. It's actually past its deadline. We were due to finish it in January. We haven't. It's now March, but we can approve it and then it'll be done, finished and sent in.
Right, so are there any other questions on this? What is the specific action on?
Just
We-
to approve it.
So we just need to approve this. as-
Committee, if they're happy with it.
So unless there are any other questions, the proposition before us is that we approve this as currently drafted. Councillor Carr.
I don't think there's any other alternative, actually. It's the deadline's gone. I don't, you know, we might not be comfortable with it, but
No.
It is what
it's-
it is,
it's- There's a first for everything.
yeah, there's nothing, yeah,
It's
it is
first
what
round.
it is, really.
It is, but I've got broad shoulders and I'm
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, no, so.
Unless there are any other comments or questions then, so the committee has recommended to approve the strategic overview and scrutiny improvement plan for 23-24, and I will propose the recommendation. And do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Payne. All those in favour, please raise your hand. I think that's
That's
unanimous.
Chair.
Now we come to item 13, group and panel update. I beg your pardon, resolved that the committee has approved the strategic overview and scrutiny improvement plan for 2023-24. Sorry. Item 13, group and panel updates. The first one is asset review, task and finish group. We will now receive a verbal update from Councillor Powell, Chair of the Asset Task and Finish Group. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chair. You will remember, I think it was back in the summer, that we, in view of the importance of the asset review, which will be considered by council, that we as Scrutiny decided to set up a task and finish group to actually look into and make recommendations about what was happening on that. At the time in the autumn, we had a meeting and Mark Andrews was at this meeting here and actually decided that there'd been a members briefing, but until there was further information, there was nothing further for the asset task and finish group to do. We had produced a draft terms of reference, which I believe were agreed at the meeting. And then at the later meeting, it was disbanded because there was no evidence on which we could proceed. Subsequent to that, Councillor Payne, as the vice chair of the group, and myself met with Mark Andrews and Penny Sharp in early January for an update, and we've been pressing for an update. We had a conversation then. Again, we were trying to work out what was the best thing Scrutiny could do to add value to this really important piece of work. Again, things weren't quite in place, so we then had another meeting 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? A week last Tuesday, to see what the current position was and where we could add value to this asset review. On the forward plan for Cabinet, and we'll be coming to Cabinet on the 15th of April, there will be a paper about taking the asset review, which initial work was done about 18 months ago, to the next stage, and there'll be options put before Cabinet. I think at this committee, we felt it was really important that Scrutiny was involved in this. We, at our meeting a week ago, last Tuesday, we requested some documentation that we could look at, all the draft Cabinet papers, so that we could actually start to have a look at what was proposed. And I did a new draft scope and called that stage 1. And then stage 2 would have been for the task and finish group to be involved in the further deliberations after that initial decision. We have had limited information. I would say very limited, and we still haven't seen the any sort of drafts of the cabinet paper. So bearing in mind the timescales in the fact that the cabinet will be on the 15th of April, papers have to be issued a week before, we are frantically running out of time because we haven't been provided with anything else. So I'm proposing at the moment that this isn't the right scope for a task and finish group because we'd almost be finished before we'd started. But when the cabinet papers will be available, obviously, to all councillors, but that scrutiny as a particular piece of work that members of scrutiny who would make a particular look at those draft papers or earlier if we can get them, feed in and make specific recommendations from a scrutiny meeting, which means we will have to convene a special scrutiny meeting, which will have to be an exempt session because a lot of the information is confidential. So I'm not proposing to ask for people to be specifically on a task and finish group at this stage. And then following that, the next stage I think would be more appropriate to a task and finish group where there is active involvement in the development of those business plans, because I feel scrutiny has a role, but it's the timing that we need to be. It's no good seeing a paper that's already been presented and then we have a very short period of time to review it and we're not, which is what I was hoping we could do at this stage, but it's just not feasible in terms of the timing unless the cabinet paper is delayed for any reason. So is that, I'll just turn to Councillor Payne to make sure that that's the correct summary and I haven't missed anything.
Please.
Thank you. I think it's really important. I feel we've been backed into a corner a little bit. And I think it's really important for stage 2 that we have full involvement and we have the time to have that full involvement as well. And that's not just us as the committee, but for democratic services as well. Just a note.
No, I agree. I agree with that. Could I just
Chair, if I may, we had a note from Penny Sharp today to say that she's still tweaking them, so she can't release them yet because they haven't been finalised.
Sorry, I've seen that note. I didn't realise that was referring to the cabinet paper.
Yes, that's the cabinet
There's a few more
papers.
days it's going to be.
Possibly, yes. I would think it's early next week.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was when I took from that note.
Yeah.
I think that what is the feasibility of having
Once the papers are published, the director has said that she's still working on the cabinet papers for the cabinet meeting on the 15th of April. I know she's on leave the first week in April, so hopefully she'll be using this week, next week to finalise the report, because then it'll need to be sent to Democratic Services for checking and publishing.
if you're wanting a special meeting, would it be after the cabinet meeting?
It'd have to be before. It'd have to be before.
Before?
Yeah.
Um,
Otherwise, it's worthless. The whole exercise is worthless.
the only date that would be possible would be Thursday, the 11th of April. To hold the meeting in here.
Right.
But I would need to double check
Okay.
that the
No,
council chamber's free.
no, I understand that, and that's absolutely fair. So, sorry, Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, I mean, just to absolutely underscore the assets, the council estate is a fundamental piece of work for elected members, and scrutiny are obviously a fundamental function of looking at that. I am really concerned that if we're not getting the opportunity to scrutinise that, I think possibly the development of the business cases, I acknowledge the nature of exempt information, etc. But fundamentally, we need, and whether this needs to go on an improvement plan or whatever, we need to be absolutely looking at the timing of these things so that we can add the greatest value, because it feels slightly as though we're having our hands tied behind our backs.
Well, I can't dissent from anything that you've said there, but in this particular instance, we are where we are, and the question before us is really whether we can actually add any value in the time that's available. And I defer to Councillor Powell on that matter.
I think so. I mean, obviously, councillors individually can comment on cabinet papers, but I think, and this is very much, this isn't, you know, this is very much initial stages and the next stage of the process. So it's not that the decisions are being made here, but as we all know, those early decisions do influence how things go. So councillors can comment individually, but I would prefer and I would recommend that actually there is a formal response from scrutiny, but it would require us all to have a look at those papers in a very short space of time when some of us are probably also on holiday, and then to have a meet, we'd have to do that before the meeting, and then to have a meeting to just formalise and agree any recommendations to cabinet, which I think would be the best way to do it. Otherwise, we're feeding in our own individual questions and comments.
I agree with that, and the only thing that I would add to that is that I think that if people were prepared to read the papers in advance, if you could also share the questions and issues that you have with your colleagues, I think that would be helpful to keeping the debate focused on the day. And I recognise it's subject to availability.
Yet if cabinet is meeting on the 15th, then the papers will be published a week before.
Yes, I think that's what you were referring to, Karen, wasn't it?
Okay, so if they were then holding a special scrutiny meeting, say on the 11th, the papers would be exempt, but they would still need to be published a week before the 11th for a formal scrutiny meeting. So the timelines are really, really tight, because then you wouldn't have time to sit and read the paper, then to make a formal decision before then submitting into cabinet. It'd be really, really tight.
Can I make a suggestion then that we have a formal note or whatever it's to cabinet to say that on this important issue, we feel that it's really, and we have been willing to contribute, and certainly Karen and I have had at least 2 meetings to sort of move this along. What have you got where? And there's possibly other things we could have been given in the meantime, that we feel that it is vital that scrutiny inputs at this early stage, and that with that we feel that this is possible, I don't like to do in the timescale permitted, bearing in mind democratic services and structures and publication of papers. And that we maybe request Cabinet to consider deferring that item on their agenda
To allow us to input.
to allow us
It's,
to
it's,
input
it's impossible.
and
to-
wait, throw the ball back in Cabinet's court.
It's impossible to exercise
can't
effective
do it.
scrutiny, a function. Councillor Edwards.
There we go. No, my thing was, I agree completely with the timescale not being realistic. But in terms of booking out a room, would that be a case where online could work? Or could we not do?
The
Because-
scrutiny committee is a public meeting, so we have to hold it in the council chamber.
Would it not be
That's-
still broadcast?
Part of it would be, because it's open up in public session, it would then go into exempt session to discuss the items before going back into public session to close it, to formally close the meeting.
I'm just, I'll have to excuse myself already then because I'm in France. So unless you can do it online, I know I will not be able to make that. I'm sorry.
Sorry, there'll be a series of options discussed on the 15th of April. And we feel that we need some input into those options, but as yet we haven't had enough information to consider those options.
I thought that was as indicated by the chief executive. Or am I missing something?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, because that's the other thing.
Councillor Stevenson.
I think frustrating is the word I'm going to use, because I think that when the asset review is discussed and where scrutiny could add value, noting the very high level of public interest because it's fundamental, I felt that was in agreement with the director of places and chief exec a long time ago. And I know that things shift a bit, but I think it's really important that the report from scrutiny this evening makes it really clear that we can't input a task and finish groups being set up in scopes, but it actually can't. I mean, Councillor Powell's saying, well, actually, there's no point doing it because you can't get on and do the work.
As I said, I think there was stage 1 and stage 2. Stage 1 was feedback on these initial options. Stage 2 is definitely something for a task and finish group to get involved in, and I'd hope that'd be very productive. But I feel that we do need that review of the first stage.
And also noting, of course, it is to the leader.
Are there, dare I ask, are there any other questions on the asset task and finish? I think we thrashed that one to death, I think.
Do we formally need to agree that we make that communication?
Right, we've, have I to propose?
Yes.
So I propose that in my role as chair, I write to the leader of the council, copy to the chief executive, explaining the concerns that we have over the ability of the scrutiny committee to effectively perform its role in relation to phase 1 of the asset review. So that's what I'm proposing.
Yes,
Can I have
the
a
papers
seconder?
that will go to cabinet on the 15th of specify those
yeah.
papers, because there is specific wording in the forward plan.
So So that, can I have a seconder? Thank you, councillor Powell. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. I'll do that tomorrow. So that brings us to, I'd like to draw this item therefore to a close. That brings us to item B, flooding evidence panel, and we will now receive a verbal update from councillor Stevenson, chair of the flooding evidence panel. Councillor Stevenson.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chair. I think the key thing to note is that we are running to time. We noted at the outset of this work, the aim is to produce a final report to come back to scrutiny at the end of April. That is a very tight turnaround, and I would say the fact that we're running on time is absolutely down to the hard work of the panel members and being very well supported by our scrutiny officer. So thank you. For the benefit, obviously, for anybody listening from the public, we've obviously scoped the work. The aim is to be objective so that we can understand what, how, when, why, if you like, in terms of our flooding response as a county, with the aim that there will be recommendations to Cabinet and full council to ensure that Rutland is as prepared as possible for flood management, but also the prevention of flooding. To that end, the panel has split into 3 groups because it is quite a big group of 10 people. So that has enabled us to split into 3 groups. One group is looking at internal agencies, if you like, so the council's highways authority response. A second group looking at external, so for example, Anglian Water, emergency services. I'm not listing them all off, you'll be relieved to know looking at the time. And then a third group, which is very much about that community engagement. And crucially, the big take home from my update is that the surveys are currently live. The deadline is Wednesday, the 27th. And I know Mark has very rightly said, oh, crikey, 2 weeks, that feels very quick. But we're confident with support, and I'd like to thank members for sharing the survey. If we get that out and push it in as much repetition as possible, it will help us to have time to look at what residents have said, cross-reference that to the internal and external groups, and actually look at what those recommendations are, because it is the residents who've been impacted. And just to add as well, all parish and town councils and parish meetings have also been sent a survey, because certainly there's some work around emergency planning and flood warnings. And have we got an update on how many people we've... Oh, brilliant. Do I need a drum roll, or is that a wet squib?
You can do a drum roll. The number of responses we have currently received from parish/town councils is 26. And the number of responses we have received from Rutland residents and businesses is 340.
I think in the context of 248 or 58 for the whole budget, I think that's good. I have emailed all members, as you will have seen, to do a big final push. And as I said in my email, and for any members of the public listening, do please share that survey, www.rutland.gov.uk/winter flooding.
May I come in off the back of that? Just, sorry, Chair. I should ask the Chair, not you. Sorry. We've discussed at a couple of parish council meetings, and I had one last night in Ketton as well, bearing in mind the fact they're the 3rd largest population in Rutland as well. There was some feedback from the parish council that people are still frightened of filling the survey in because they think they'll be identified. So I don't know whether we can push a message out to say, please fill in the survey. We don't necessarily need your postcode.
We ran the questionnaires through the information governance team, and it would not collect any personal data, i.e. nobody could be identified from it. Even if they put in their postcode, which they don't have to, but it would just locate the general area they were in, not the actual street or house or anything like that.
But this is the feedback I'm getting, that there are people wary of completing it because they'll be identified. Yeah.
Councillor Edwards.
Just to say the same, I've had the same, because I've been pushing it there. And people are wary, they don't want to put their thing, and I know that they don't have to. I think that the thing doesn't say that you have to, it's not one of the required
No.
boxes, but I think it's just a thing that we say people, no, don't worry, you don't have to do this, because they're all saying they don't want to.
So could I suggest then, because I think regardless of whether we as a panel know that the postcode actually is precisely so that we can identify if there are specific areas within the county. Clearly people are worried about that, and we are getting that as feedback from both sources, from various sources, apologies. What I will suggest then is that I crack out an email to all members highlighting that as something that's come up in this panel, so that when we are sharing that, we can put that as a note. I will do a separate thing. I don't know, Jane, whether the communications team will have sufficient resource just to crack out something, maybe not, in which case we'll need to push on the member-led stuff, but because I will sort of try and sort that out tomorrow. Yeah, no, I think and also to explain why we want postcodes, because actually I think we've tried to keep the survey really snippy snappy, and actually we haven't covered why we want the postcodes. So that's, thank you.
The postcodes were in compliance with NHS standards. And that means it can't identify people. It can't identify your house.
But if I think the fact that if people are still worried about it, whether they're right to worry, they are worried. So we need to allay their worries, I think.
I, just as final say, would prefer to get a response without a postcode than to not get a response. Because the rest of the information is relevant of how people were affected in the county, rather than not knowing exactly which road they were on or which part they were in. It's all evidence of people being affected. And you can understand why somebody might want to say that LE 158XZ had flooding issues, because that, yeah, you're told it's not showing up, but yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, people are worried, they're worried. And that's our job, to allay those fears.
All right, and anything else on that?
No, unless anybody else has got any questions. Hopefully I've covered everything.
Okay, thank you. I'll draw that item to a close. Is there any urgent business, Jane?
We have not been notified of any urgent business, Chair.
Thank you. So the date of the next meeting will be confirmed following the annual council meeting in May 2024. And I therefore declare this meeting closed at 9:05. Thank you very much indeed.